Hello, welcome to Strategic Management. My name is Mark Anderson and I will be discussing industry analysis, and this is part one of 3 parts. I'll be looking mainly at the work of Michael Porter, a Harvard University professor whose writing and research since the early 1980s has had a considerable influence on the way in which strategy is studied and applied. Michael Porter was interested in trying to understand why are some industries more profitable than others. If we look at this data here, which shows return on invested capital over a long period of time, the average for a number of different industries, we can see that there is a consistent pattern of different industries achieving different levels of profitability. For Michael Porter, this level of profitability makes some industries more attractive than others. So an industry which has a high level of profitability is an attractive industry in which to compete or in which perhaps try to enter. So it became important for him to try and understand what is it that influences this level of profitability in different industries. Through his research, he identified 5 generic forces which are present to a greater or lesser degree in all industries. And it is these 5 forces which influence the level, or rather the differing level, of profitability across different industries. The 5 forces are the threat of entry, the threat of substitutes, the power of buyers, the power of suppliers, and the level of rivalry within the industry. What was novel about this approach to understanding the structure of an industry is that until this point, competition was only ever really considered to between the companies within the industry, the actual players. What Porter did, though, was to spread the idea of competition wider. So he sees competition coming from buyers and suppliers, as well as substitutes, and also, of course, the rising threat of entry of new entrants to the industry. So all these different players can influence the level of profitability and therefore the attraction of any particular industry. Typically, Porter's concept is drawn out like this. You can see that the threat of entry, the bargaining power of buyers, the threat of substitutes, and the bargaining power of suppliers are all ranged around the outside of competitive rivalry. And the arrows pointing in towards competitive rivalry indicate that those 4 forces, although independent of each other, all have an influence over the level of rivalry. Before we go much further in trying to understand how to apply 5 forces, then we need to understand a couple of key definitions which help you understand the way in which this concept is applied. So we need to understand the idea of strategic groups and of strategic business unit. Within any industry, there are lots of different companies, but not all those companies are competing directly with each other. So if you think about the airline industry, Ryanair doesn't compete directly with Qantas. Qantas are in the long-haul sector and Ryanair are in the short-haul sector. So these are 2 identifiable strategic groups within that industry. And when we conduct a 5 forces analysis, we'll only consider one strategic group at a time. The other concept then is the idea of strategic business units. If we look at large companies, often referred to as large corporations, they may well have a number of different operating divisions or strategic business units. Each of these SBUs exists independently within the corporation, and they may well be operating in different segments of the same industry or completely different industries. If you're to consider Rolls-Royce, then Rolls-Royce has a division which manufactures jet engines, but it also has a division which manufactures power plants for the nuclear power industry. So those two different industries would not be considered within the same analysis. So if we were looking at Rolls-Royce's role in any particular industry, we'll only look at the relevant SBU. It's easier perhaps to understand that if we look at an example. Here we've got the automotive industry, and we've got two variables, product range along the bottom and price up the side. In the bottom right hand corner we've got a large circle with Ford, Renault, Honda, General Motors and so forth in it. This group of companies all have a broad range of products, and generally they price their products at the lower end of the market. This is very different to the group of companies at the top left-hand corner. Rolls-Royce and Bentley have very narrow product ranges, but they sell their cars at a very high price. The conditions for the strategic group containing Rolls-Royce and Bentley are very different to the conditions under which Ford and the rest of that strategic group operate. So an analysis of the automotive industry would treat them as different strategic groups. We might look at different ways of defining strategic groups. We've just used price and product range there, but we might also use geographical coverage, size of the company, different market segments, the particular distribution channels, or maybe the product or service level quality. So there are different ways to define these strategic groups, and that helps us to start understanding in more detail the structure of any particular industry. So to finish this first part, a quick summary. Different industries can be seen to achieve different average levels of profitability. Within all of those industries, of course, there are some firms which achieve high levels of profitability and others which achieve lower profitability. The higher level of profitability makes industries more attractive to compete in, maybe to join or to stay in. Porter's 5 Forces framework tries to assess the generic forces that influence that level of profitability. The 5 Forces analysis looked at the structure of an industry, or more accurately, strategic groups within industry. It does not analyze individual companies or strategic business units. The purpose of conducting a 5 Forces analysis is to understand the drivers of profitability in any particular industry. If a company understands that, then it should be possible to create a strategy to improve competitive advantage and to make their own company more successful.